Hello and welcome back to From the Nosebleeds this week. Wetzel and I couldn't really get together to meet, so I'm going to be dropping an episode recapping the Notre Dame Clemson game, Florida Georgia game as well, recapping my bets and then looking at the bets going into this week. This week's slate's not too great, so we're not going to really talk about it. Wetzel might get into some of the games coming up this week. He might be sending me something over, so stay tuned for that. Next week, we'll announce this now. We're going to get into a college basketball preview. So look forward to that. Get into college basketball season here coming up in under 2 weeks. Thanksgiving week is when it returns. But college football had probably its biggest weekend with two of its biggest games of the year to date, last weekend with Florida and Georgia, and then Clemson at Notre Dame. We'll start off with the Florida-Georgia game and take a look at the game. Florida wins 44-28. It probably should have been a more lopsided victory for Florida. In all honesty, they dominated this game in every facet. They had over double the amount of total yards as Georgia had. The Georgia can't get their quarterback play going. Couldn't really get the run going outside of the 75-yard touchdown. You take that away, Georgia as a team had 28 carries for 90 yards. So that's not really going to lead to success in our run-first offense. Florida only had 97 yards rushing, but their passing game made up for it. More than made up for it. Florida really dominated this game. Georgia was only really around in the first half, and then after halftime, Florida easily pulled away, and this game wasn't really watchable in the second half. When Georgia goes 2 for 13 on third downs, it's not a good sign. Where Florida's 7 for 16, Georgia had 3 turnovers. Florida only had the one. That was a pick six. You see that pick six early on, and you're like, okay, maybe Georgia can stay in this thing with their defense, but Florida's offense was just too much, and eventually you got to move the football as an offense, and Georgia really couldn't do that outside of, you get that pick six, they have the 75-yard touchdown run. Outside of that, they really struggled. So, like I said, this game should have been more lopsided than it was. You look at the quarterback play, and it starts there. Kyle Trask, 30 of 43, 474 yards, 4 touchdowns, the one pick six that we mentioned. But, he really had an outstanding game, jumps himself back into the Heisman conversation after this performance. Georgia on the other side had woeful performances from both their quarterbacks that played. Stetson Bennett, 5 of 16, 78 yards, a touchdown, and a pick. Got hurt in the game. And then you go to Mathis, who was 4 of 13, 34 yards, a touchdown, a pick. If you combine those two, 9 for 29, 112 yards, it's not going to get the job done in 2020. Eventually, Georgia, has to realize that they have to have good, maybe not good, but, at least average quarterback play. You're not even getting average quarterback play, and that's why they're losing these games. I've been saying it for the last couple of weeks that they need to figure something else out because Stetson Bennett's not the answer. Now he's hurt. Mathis isn't the answer. You saw him play in the first game of the year against Arkansas. Didn't look great. He comes in here, doesn't look great here. He's warming up on the sideline, getting ready to go in, and he hits a coach or equipment manager off to the side. That's just – it's not going to cut it in the modern football game. You need better quarterback play. And, again, you're asking, where's JT Daniels? What's going on with JT Daniels? Coming into this year, Georgia has Jamie Newman, JT Daniels. It looks like they've got an abundance of quarterback play. Newman transfers out, opts out, whatever, and a lot of people are like, oh, that must mean JT Daniels is the reason he's leaving because you look at these other guys, it's obviously not them. JT Daniels hasn't stepped on the field. He's been cleared since the first week, so I don't know what's going on there. Might be something. There's rumor mills that it's something with the insurance, but who knows? Can't really get a clear answer from Kirby Smart. So, I mean, they need better quarterback play. I mean, that's been consistent with Georgia the last couple of years. They've had really good defenses, but haven't had the offense to really help them take that next step into the top 4 conversation. And I mean, it sucks. You had Jake Fromm his freshman year, he looked great. And then after that, he kind of regressed. And he was supposed to be a top 10 pick. A lot of people coming into his freshman year were already saying, this guy's going to go in the first round of the draft, probably top 10. And look where he went. He ended up going, I believe, in the 4th round to the Bills. Eventually, Kirby Smart's got to do something with these recruits he's getting at quarterback and these transfers that he's getting at quarterback and have somewhat of a competent offense in 2020, not one that relies so heavily on the run. You got to have better quarterback play, and I don't think Kirby Smart's on the hot seat, but I think his seat's starting to get a little warm. You've got all these top 5 recruiting classes, and you don't really have anything to show for it. So it's like, you've got all this talent here, but you can't put it together when you need to. So I think his seat's getting a little warm, and that's you can't lose to Florida, who doesn't play defense and only put up under 300 yards of total offense. That's inexcusable. I'd also like to say that maybe Georgia's defense isn't as good as we thought. They've played a lot of average to pretty bad teams so far this year, I would say. Looking at their schedule, they haven't really played any good offenses outside of Bama and Florida, and look what both those offenses did to their defense. Both put up over 40 points. Both, have pretty good games in terms of total yards and whatnot. They hold Arkansas to 10 points. Sure, that's fine and dandy. They hold Auburn to 6 points, who's not really very good on offense this year. As we've seen, they hold Tennessee to 21 points. They've got a bunch of problems going on at quarterback. Then you play Alabama, give up 41. They look really good. Looked like they moved the ball with ease in the second half. Hold Kentucky to 3 points, but Kentucky, has been up and down all year. Then you play another good offense in Florida and give up 44 and over 500 yards. So I'm not really sure how good this Georgia defense actually is. A lot of people want to say that it's top 5. It's right up in there. The 2 good offenses that they have played, they've not looked good. Part of that's on their offense for not being able to stay on the field. And luckily for them, they don't really play another good offense the rest of the year. They've got Mississippi State, South Carolina, Vanderbilt. Mizzou game might get rescheduled. Who knows? But so I have questions about the defense. I'm not convinced they're as good as everybody else thinks they are, which will lead me into the next game. Notre Dame hosting Clemson. Notre Dame wins this one 47-40 in double overtime. Probably the game of the year, easily the game of the year, actually, so far in college football. So there's a lot to break down about this one. And first thing I want to say is I was right about this game. High-scoring game. It favored Notre Dame, as you see. And you say, oh, they only scored 33 points. Yeah, but that's still pretty high scoring. Clemson would have liked to control the clock a little more, run the ball a little better than they did. And I think that speaks on Notre Dame's defense. I've been high on their defense this year. They've got a lot of playmakers. You've got their linebacker, Jeremiah, had an outstanding game, 9 total tackles, 7 solo, half sack, 2.5 tackles for loss. So he was flying all over the football field. Guy's a really good linebacker, does it all. Dalen Hayes, senior on defensive line, had a good game, had 2 impact tackles for losses. Hamilton, their safety, is another good player on that defense. And somebody on their offense I'd like to keep an eye on going forward is Michael Mayer, their freshman tight end. He impressed me in this game, and he's been pretty good so far this year. I think he's probably going to be better than Cole Kmet was at Notre Dame. So he's somebody to keep an eye on for their offense. I think their defense made plays when they needed to. Yeah, they gave up 40 points in overtime, but they really made Clemson one-dimensional. And going into this game, I talked about how if Clemson wants to win this game, it's going to have to be a little more low scoring than they're used to. I also said that Clemson will need to rely on Travis Etienne and the running game to kind of dictate the pace and flow of the game. They couldn't do that. They had 33 carries for only 34 yards. I mean, that's only a yard per carry. That's an outstanding job, and it speaks volumes on the front seven that Notre Dame has. I've been high again on this defense more so than Wetzel was, and I think they proved it. When they needed to make big plays on defense, they made big plays. They controlled the turnover battle, had forced 3 Clemson turnovers to Notre Dame's 1. Ian Book's unfortunate turnover in the red zone that really helped Clemson stay in the game. You know, if he doesn't turn it over there, do you even go to overtime? Who knows? Yeah, but overall, it was a really good game. Good job by Notre Dame forcing Clemson to be one-dimensional, forcing the game to rely on a true freshman quarterback. Not that he played bad. He played pretty well. I had 29 completions on 44 attempts, 439 yards, 2 touchdowns, an 89.7 QBR, and a rushing touchdown on top of that. Compared to Ian Book, who was 22 of 39, 310 yards, and a touchdown. He also added 14 carries, 67 yards, 79.8 QBR. Something underrated about Ian Book is he's a pretty good athlete. I feel like not enough people realize that he is a good athlete. He's able to add to that running game. And, you know, when it mattered most, Clemson was up 33-26 late in the game. Ian Book orchestrated a big drive to help Notre Dame tie the football game at 33 and go to the overtime. So, you know, coming in this game, I had question marks about him. You know, could he win you that big game? And I think he proved it here, especially with that late drive and then his play in overtime. You know, bouncing back after that turnover in the red zone where he fumbles the ball. So I think he had a big game. Kyren Williams, sophomore running back for Notre Dame out of St. Louis, shout out to Lou, had 23 carries, 140 yards, and 3 touchdowns. So he had a really good performance. He's somebody that's only going to get better in that offense. And, I mean, like, I feel like Notre Dame really had control of this game. They came out with a 23 to, I think it was 23-10 or 23-13 lead at halftime. But yeah, they had a lead going into half, and you know, we're always in this game. Clemson took the lead late. It was 23-13 at the half. Clemson had a really good third quarter. Notre Dame's offense was really struggling there. But, you know, bounce back and get some points in the fourth quarter and get it to overtime. Notre Dame had a really good game. Everything went their way, you know. Had good game rushing, had good enough quarterback play, limited Clemson to be one-dimensional, which you don't say very often, especially in the Trevor Lawrence, Travis Etienne era. Had the advantage in the turnover battle. And also you look at the third downs. Clemson was 4 of 15 on third down. Notre Dame was 10 on 19. Extending those drives, usually if you look at the turnover battle and the third down conversion rate, it can really tell you a lot. The yards were pretty even, not so even in the running game, but total yards, they were pretty even, which is why the game went to overtime. But, you know, when Notre Dame needed a stop or needed a big play, and that second overtime they needed a big play, they needed a stop. Their defense stepped up. I think their defense is very good, very underrated in my opinion. I think it's better than Georgia's defense. I'll give them more credit than Georgia's defense. because in the big games, they make the big stops, whereas Georgia's defense, the big games, the two big games they've had, they haven't made the big stops yet. So I think Notre Dame, a lot of people want to write in Clemson already for the championship game if Trevor Lawrence returns. In reality, they need some defensive guys to return. They were missing a few key pieces on that defense, which really hurt them. You saw it impact the game, I think, more so than if Trevor Lawrence was in this game. I'm not sure necessarily that Clemson wins this game. I don't know if it makes that much of a difference because they were missing those key pieces on defense. And it's kind of shown a little more in the last couple of weeks that these injuries are taking the toll on Clemson's defense because they're giving up more points. They're not looking as great as they usually do. So I think if there is a rematch, which I think there will be, don't count out Notre Dame just because Trevor Lawrence is playing. If Clemson gets some of those defensive guys back, then maybe it is a different story, but don't count out Notre Dame in a second game against Clemson because if you look at this game, I don't know how much of a difference he would have made. I really don't. I think Notre Dame deserves all the credit in the world for this win. I don't think you can really put an asterisk on it unless, you get those defensive guys back and they make a big impact in that second game. I think right now, if Notre Dame wins out and they lose to Clemson, I still think they're in the playoffs because I think this is the biggest win of the year for anybody so far. Georgia's not what everybody thought they were, in my opinion. Florida's lost to Texas A&M, who got blown out by Alabama. So SEC, in my opinion, isn't as great as people think it is this year. I think the ACC and this win, I think, cements it that they are the top conference this year. You can say whatever you want, but I think when you've got a 1-2 punch like this, you're probably better than everybody else. I mean, if you look at the SEC, if Alabama ends up playing Florida, I think they roll through Florida. And I think Notre Dame can compete with an Alabama. And I think Clemson can compete with an Alabama. I think Notre Dame can compete with Ohio State. I think Clemson can compete with Ohio State. I might be in the minority in that, but I'm going to give more credit to Notre Dame because I think they deserve it. And I'm typically a Notre Dame hater. I will admit that. I usually don't give them the credit. Usually think they are overrated, but I think they proved that they can play on a national stage this year. And I think last year when they almost beat Georgia, they even proved that. So I think it's time to respect them a little more, respect this team a little more. So I do think the ACC proved that they are worthy of where I ranked them last week in my conference power rankings. And with that, we'll get into a recap of my bets that I made this past weekend. I went 9-5 plus 4.5 units. Started out Friday with the Miami. We lost. I had them to cover. They lost. They won the game, but they lost the bet. I had the BYU and Boise over. That one was pretty easy. BYU almost covered that themselves. I had Cincy to cover. Put 2.5 units on Cincy to cover because that was my lock of the week. I also had team total points for Houston under in that game, and then that one was pretty easy to hit as well. And the Indiana game, I had them to cover 3.5. They ended up winning outright. Michigan's in shambles. I had the Minnesota over. That one came close, but couldn't pull it out. I had the ASU and USC over. That one also came close, but couldn't pull it out. It dropped down to 55.5 where I got it at. I had Oregon State to cover, and they got beat by Washington State, so they did not cover. I had the Oklahoma over, and they almost covered it by themselves. I had Florida to cover, and they ended up winning outright. I had Vandy to cover plus 19. They made it way more interesting in the second half after being down 17-0. I ended up losing 24-7. I had South Carolina to cover +10 against A&M, and A&M rolled through them. Arkansas to win outright against Tennessee. They did. They were about even. They're the UNC over, which is a play that Wetzel and I both like going forward. So, yeah, it was a pretty good weekend for me. And overall, looking at the college football playoff picture right now, I think this win for Notre Dame really hurts the chances of a BYU or a Cincinnati, which I kind of want to get into that. I was looking at a playoff predictor, and they gave BYU higher odds than Cincinnati. In my opinion, BYU's played two good teams. Cincinnati's played three good teams. They've played SMU. They've played Houston. They've played Memphis. They're going to play UCF next week, who's another pretty good team. They play Tulsa later on down the road, who plays SMU this week. So they've got more quality teams than BYU, but playoff predictor gives BYU a higher percentage chance to get into the playoffs. I understand they destroyed Boise State on Friday this past weekend, but Boise State was on their third and fourth string quarterback. Boise State didn't have their starting running back. So I don't know how you can say that they're a better team than Cincinnati over that game. And then if you look at the one common team that both teams have played, Houston led BYU at the half. They scored 26 against BYU, led up 43, lost by 17. Cincinnati, on the other hand, they win 38-10 against BYU, win by 28. I think Cincinnati has the better resume. If you watch Cincinnati, they pass the eye test a little more than BYU, in my opinion. I think BYU is really good, but I just don't think they're better than Cincinnati based off of two games where Cincinnati's put together 3 games that are quality wins. Maybe you could make the argument that even the Army game is a quality win. So I don't see that. Big Ten's getting interesting. Wisconsin's returning to play this weekend against Michigan. It'll be interesting to see how Graham Mertz does in the second game. And Wisconsin in general, after this long layoff, you get a 2-week layoff. Now you got Michigan. So that conference is starting to take shape more. The Pac-12, Cal, Arizona State just got canceled. Cal hasn't played a game. I really want to see Cal play because I think they're pretty good. Arizona State competed against USC. Oregon looks good. So overall, the playoff picture, I think right now, the top 4 teams you see are pretty cemented there. Only thing that would allow something else to open up is if one of those top 3 lose. Maybe not. And by saying that, I mean to somebody else for Notre Dame. So Notre Dame would have to lose one of their remaining games. They've got BC this week. UNC next week's a big one. They'd have to lose one of their remaining games before the ACC championship for that really to open up. Clemson would have to lose. So any of these top 4 teams would have to lose a game for it to really open up. Ohio State, I don't see losing. Bama, I don't see losing. Notre Dame, they've got a couple tricky tests coming up, so we'll see with them. Clemson, I don't think will lose. So I think right now the 4th team's still in question, but if Notre Dame wins out and then just loses to Clemson, I think the top 4 you see, Bama's going to be 1. Ohio State might be 2, Clemson maybe 3, Notre Dame 4, 3, somewhere in there. So I think these 4 teams got a pretty strong hold on the top 4. Wisconsin could make it interesting. I don't think BYU and Cincinnati can really make it interesting unless these conferences kind of self-implode. So that's my recap and a little overall look at the college football playoff landscape. Stay tuned for some bets.